I'm Zoltan and I am here to explain how I created this illustration. Originally this was created for the Harry Potter Week prompt in 2018 and this was the last day of the challenge, and the theme for the last day was rivals. I wanted to do something special for this illustration, and since I wanted to avoid cliched rivals from the Harry Potter universe, I turned to my all-time favorite Harry Potter expert in the house, my wife, and she recommended a very interesting pairing that I didn't even know about, or at least I've forgotten about it, Professor Travoli and Firenze. Since Travoli was kicked out by Dolores Umbridge from the school, Firenze took her post, and I believe in the 6th year they had to share classes because Dumbledore just couldn't get rid of any of them really. So there was a bit of strife between them. I usually use this blue to rough out the sketch part, and I usually move it around quite a bit. Since it is digital, it is very easy to do that. And I usually do a lot of flipping the canvas. It is very easy to do in Clip Studio. It's far easier than in Photoshop, and it really helps you to notice mistakes in your drawing. Now I started the inking process. I do this on a separate layer, and I tend to use my all-time favorite inking tool, the real G-Pen. The normal G-Pen is quite fine as well, but it's a bit sterile for my purposes. I like the natural texture that the real G-Pen uses, especially when you do a bit of close-up or do a bigger printing of your artwork. You can kind of see it in the details. It gives it a more natural feel to it. So I'm laying in some details on her hair, giving it sort of a shading feel to it, that some shadows will be there. Now I'm doing the background characters. Originally I wanted to use a more thinner lines for them, but I've kind of sticked with the overall shape of the real G-Pen, so it will seem a bit more consistent with the overall look. After I hide my sketch layer, I usually tend to correct the line work here and there because you can see it far more clearly when it's on its own, what is working and what is not, and I have put a bit more thicker lines between the foreground character and the background ones. I'm starting to lay down the basic colors for this piece. I have created a color palette before I started this entire phase, and I have used some production photos from the Harry Potter films, and I only pasted on it because I found out after a few tests it didn't really work with my paintings, so I've changed them a bit. And I'm using a flat marker tool for my coloring. For this piece, that is the only painting tool that I use, except for a smudge tool that I sometimes use to blend together colors and shading. And this technique, what I'm doing right now, is kind of tedious since you have a very sterile white background and you have to go several times over it with your marker to get enough shading, I guess. But I wanted to imitate the natural feel of markers, which when you use them you can get very different tones, but if you want to make it darker you have to go over it again and again. It is very interesting and nice, but it's very tedious and time consuming really. To give it a more natural look, I used a scanned version of a A4 copying paper. I scanned it and changed its contrast so it will work as a texture for my work, and you can see it above the coloring layer, that gray layer. I use it on overlay, and this gives a papery feel to my work, and for some people who don't even know, they may think that it was created traditionally. Now I'm going over my painted layer the third time. This time I'm doing little brush strokes, not unifying them but separating them a bit, so it will give it a nice little textury feel to it. And for the last layer, above all of the layers, I go over with a white G pen, giving it some very nice little surface details and highlights. Now going through some adjustments, and in the final part I do a layer above all of this with an overlay option, and I give it a bit more shadows and highlights to accentuate things. And here's the final work. Thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.